Hello everyone, how are you doing today? So this video is a video response to Lion Sword, and the topic is, do actual good beings exist, or only beings we feel are good? Or rather, do actual benevolent beings exist, or only beings we feel are benevolent? And we're going to discuss the distinction between our personal experiences of these beings, or supposed beings, whether our experiences were real or illusory, and why that's various degrees of irrelevant to the topic at hand. And we're also going to discuss the distinction between functional, practical, tangible, doable benevolence and good, distinguished from what it hypertechnically actually is, and why it's important to remain aware of what things actually are, distinguished from what we feel or think they are, as much as those things may be worth pursuing. So first, we'll read off what he says here. The sad reality is that most truthers are completely full of shit and doing nothing to help the situation. And I would say every being is full of shit and doing nothing to help alter reality, because reality is forever a nightmare hellscape, no matter how good or how wonderful an entity may be otherwise within reality. I think many beings believe that they're doing a lot to help the situation and trying to help the situation, but I don't believe any entities actually are. I hope that makes sense. As I've said many times before, most are content as long as they have a comfy home and internet access. It's interesting how the word content is connected to content. Intriguing. Noteworthy point. They ride valiantly behind their keyboard steed and charge into a battle that ultimately means nothing. You cannot talk your way out of this. You cannot research your way out of this. It is very obvious most are not going to make it, and I don't say that gleefully. It's the damn truth. I don't think there is any way out of this in any way, shape, or form, no matter how much we want to or desire that or believe it. Now, if by this you mean this particular realm itself, yes, there may be a way out of this particular realm, this particular hellscape. But this, in the sense of reality itself on the vaster scale, I don't think there's any way out of that, no matter what you do, whether it's talking, whether it's action, whether it's altering realms, creating your own realms, creating your own paradise states. I don't consider any of those things to be out of this being reality itself on a larger scale beyond just this realm. The storm is coming, and it's going to hit so hard that most will wish they could trade anything to get this precious time we have back. They won't be anywhere near ready, and most haven't even started yet. Yes, well, the reality is most people aren't prepared for very practical brass tacks disastrous situations that are going to be shoved in everybody's faces at any moment, and are being shoved in everyone's faces at every moment, every day we live here, various situations. But of course, more apocalyptic situations, more disastrous ones, yeah, most people are never anywhere near ready. That's true, that part. So let's move on to going a little overview of the videos I did on this topic recently. The framework of reality, perpetuation of pleasure is eternal rebellion against the evil God. I highly suggest everyone watch this video, first and foremost, to enter into this topic, because in this video we talk about the frameworks of reality with evidences thereof. And many people from many different viewpoints align with the topics that are talked about in this video. People who are otherwise not actually big fans of each other mutually agree with the points brought up in this video. So I highly suggest people start here. And then Torturous Reality Beyond the BS. Jennifer Lee Daughtry, gorgeous innocent woman, tortured to death, never forget her. And this is a humor video, of course, here. How to Spot Lying Teachers Instantly. I guess, and we get back to this video. The source of reality is obviously evil. Highly recommend this one people watch as well, because I provide evidences therein that reality, in fact, and the source thereof is, in fact, evil beyond what we may otherwise want or think or prefer to believe about it, and independent of our individual experiences therein and thereof. And of course, this one, you seriously think your psychology is different from the loose feeders? What a sick joke. That's a useful, functional video going into the psychological aspects of things. This is why absolute escape narratives are BS, and I recommend people finalize with this one after those other videos. But these videos together, they're on a specific playlist, and that playlist is called, for those of you who may not know yet, The playlist is called The Nightmare Called Reality. So I have all these videos contained within the specific fold here. And of course, the framework of reality, this is the first one in this list. Perpetuation of pleasure is eternal rebellion against the evil God. Quote unquote, of course, God, thing, it, whatever, she, he, she, whatever your view is on whatever the source thing is. The point is that thing or being or whatever is evil. Whether you think it's a being or just a thing or a concept or whatever. Point is, it's evil.
Hello, everyone.
Okay.
I hope you're feeling absolutely wonderful today.
Okay, so let's move on and analyze a little bit of the discussion we had so far. And he did a video called Forces of Light in relationship to this topic recently, which I watched, and I figured, you know what, this would be a good time to do a video response to this topic, because I think this subject is on a lot of people's minds, and I really think it's important that people who discuss this type of topic really understand what we're actually dealing with beyond what we believe or want to be true, okay? Understanding what we're actually dealing with, factually. Okay. So his first response was, my response was, this is why I always say perpetual pleasurism is the way. The entire psychology of escape is a misplaced ideology. Engage and contain is my activity and perspective. So I would give the comparison of like this. The nightmare hellscape that is reality, this and all other tiers I would suggest. Basically, the psychology of escaping is basically the psychology of running away from a monster that's ripping things apart, right? Whereas engaging and containing is the idea of trapping and locking up the monster that very well may not be killable. So if this thing is in fact an eternal thing that's not killable, which the evidence seems to show that the horrors that at the root of reality are in fact eternal and not actually things that have popped up within space and time, and I can go more elaborate on that in future videos. If that's the case, which the evidence shows that it is, then engaging and containing is the only thing we can do, because there is eternally forever no escape from the thing. So it's the difference between locking up a beast that's going to forever exist, locking it up in a box, the Jack in the Box theme for you esoteric theme people out there who are aware of these things. That's what it's referring to. It's locking up the thing, keeping it contained forever, perpetually, understanding that we need to forever keep the thing locked up and can't let it loose because it's not actually killable. Okay? Something obviously that's forever existed is obviously not able to be brought out of existence. That being the premise of the idea, right? So I think engaging and containing is the accurate way to look at it versus escaping. Okay. So I don't agree, and I think you actually do agree with me a lot more than you think you do at the moment, Lion Sword, but hopefully we can keep talking about this subject, and I have a feeling you'll recognize you actually probably do agree with me a lot more than you think you might do already. For me, pleasure is fleeting, and I don't seek it out much anymore. So when I talk about pleasure, I don't talk about pleasure just within the temporary state of this realm. I'm talking about pleasure way beyond this state also, but also pleasure within the state as well, and the perpetuation thereof, not just pleasure. The idea of the perpetuation is that you make sure it isn't fleeting, that it lasts and keeps lingering. That's the perpetuation part. That's perpetual pleasurist instead of just pleasurist. It's hard to explain, but of course in a much better world where a lot less was on the line, I would probably be much more inclined to enjoy myself. In a way, I also agree with you, because if ultimately we aren't headed towards pure peace, freedom, and yes, pleasure, then what is the point exactly? We cannot be at war forever, as that would be pointless. Well, it is pointless, but I think that's the reality, is that forever we will be at war, literally forever. That is the reality. Whether it's pointless or has a point, I just see that that is as the reality, period. Obviously, it would be nice if there was an actual forever freedom thing that existed, but I just don't see evidence for that being the case. Not just evidence within like mundane scientific circles, but evidence if you look at all depths of reality. I don't see evidence within any tier of reality of that being the case. War for the sake of war with no end. Well, it's not necessarily for the sake of war. It's for the sake of ensuring the perpetuation of pleasure. It's not just for the sake of war. It's not just fighting for fighting, even though fighting is what keeps going on. The purpose is to maintain and perpetuate pleasure paradise states eternally, and to keep the evil thing locked up so that it can never manifest a potential world ever again, which will lead to torture again. It's a catch-22 for me personally, and again, I disagree to some extent for me, but at the same time, I get where you're coming from. Okay. And then I said, had you seen my most recent video on this topic posted early this morning? Perhaps that may change your perspective somewhat. I haven't, but I'll give it a listen. And thanks for listening, brother. I appreciate it. And giving that a watch over. So afterwards, don't take this the wrong way, but I still don't agree. If I hadn't experienced certain incredibly supernatural things directly, I'd be a bit more inclined to do so. I think we are going to get an absurd amount of power back, and things are going to change for the better in a massive way. Now, that would be cool, but the point I make is even if and when we get that absurd amount of power back, and even if things do change for the better in a massive way, that won't change the fact that Jennifer Daughtry was tortured to death, will it? And even if somehow, vastly in the future, somebody could literally get to the point of being able to alter the past reality itself in some way, even that wouldn't change the fact, because the point is she's already been tortured to death. So it would just, the best you could get is a simulation of a different past, but not an actual alteration of the past, right? So the sensations to her nervous system were torturous. And that is the case. The children who are microwaved to death and roasted alive in ovens, the sensations to their nervous systems already have had that experience. And it's a bloodstain on the rest of reality forever, no matter how good things get or no matter how much we improve things, is my main point in the content I'm bringing up on this subject. I don't believe in a benevolent God of this realm either, but that doesn't mean no such force exists. Well, I make very clear in many videos that my dynamic with the pleasure goddess, I'm very aware that there are benevolent entities that do exist in my experience, from my experience, but in fact that those entities are still hyper-technically evil, because even though to me personally those entities have been benevolent, what did she do to stop Jennifer Daughtry from being tortured to death for 36 hours? And many other people who were tortured to death over much more prolonged periods, in fact. She didn't do, the pleasure goddess, none of these benevolent entities did anything to stop that from happening, did they? So even though they may romance and treat really well and in incredibly wonderful ways, but what did they do to prevent others from being tortured to death? Well, the point is they didn't do anything to prevent them from being tortured to death. Either they wouldn't or they couldn't, or a combination of both. Either way, that classifies them as technically within the fold of evil, even though to me personally, and maybe to billions of other beings, they might be experienced as benevolent entities, thus entities that feel good to us personally, and are benevolent to me and you, but they weren't benevolent to Jennifer Daughtry, is my point. Okay? So they're still within the fold of evil, and this is why all entities are classified within the fold of evil, evidently and obviously, because none of them prevented the torture. You see? So no matter how much power they had or have, none of them prevented the torture that had already taken place. So no matter what they do going forward, no matter what you do going forward, no matter what I do going forward, even if we become the most powerful, most amazing, badass, pleasure-exuding entities that have ever existed, traverse this cosmos or other realms beyond this one, well, we can't reverse the fact that they were tortured to death. We didn't prevent them from in the first place, this time around being tortured to death. You get my drift? So we're also not good either. That's my point. That's why we're not actually good, because we're not entities that actually prevent any torture the first time from happening. Never mind what we do afterwards. We didn't prevent it the first time. So it's inaccurate forever for any of us to say that we're good at any point in the future, because the bloodstain of reality is on all of us. Every being that exists, however good you may be as a being, we share the bloodstain of Jennifer Daughtry being tortured to death. None of us stopped her from being tortured to death. None of us stopped it. So the blood is on all of our hands to some extent for just being beings that exist in the first place. Never mind whether we willed that to happen or not. Just the fact that we didn't stop it, it's on our hands to some extent. Okay? We might have tried to stop it, but there was nobody who even knew this was happening to her. Okay? So the attempt to stop it wasn't either, because nobody knew what was going on. They knew that torture was happening in the world in various ways, but they didn't understand the specifics of her situation or the specifics of so many other situations. So that's what I mean. We're still implicated irregardless of what our intentions are or not, is my point. We're not as implicated as an entity that purposefully puts other entities through torture intentionally, knowingly, wantingly, obviously, but we're still implicated, even though we're not as implicated, if that makes sense. For me, it isn't about waiting on a savior either. It's a complete detachment process from this place. And a true knowing, there is much more beyond. Well, there's definitely much, much more beyond. And a lot of that much, much more beyond may very well be far worse than this state, even though some of it may be much better. A lot of it may be much worse. True freedom exists, but very few will do what is necessary to walk through the door to get there. Well, I would say an experience of what you would consider to be freedom may exist. But I wouldn't call that true actual freedom. Because think about it. If true freedom actually existed ever, or exists now, we would never have had even the potential of being forced into experiences against our will. No living entity, Jennifer Daughtry, would never have had the potential of being thrust into a body in which she experienced torture to death in the first place, if true freedom existed ever for all eternity. Because that true freedom existing would mean that no living entity was ever exposed to anything they didn't desire or anything agonizing or torturous. That's what that would mean. So a semblance of freedom, a realm where you're obliviously absorbed in believing you're free, may exist, where you're convinced you're a free entity. Sure, those realms probably highly likely do exist. And they need to exist for the sanity of living beings that do exist, right? But very few will do to walk through the door to get there. Well, walking through the door, once again, getting to that state, it's still not a state of actual true freedom. It's just going to be a state where you think you're free or believe you're free and experience huge amounts of pleasure and what you want. But that's not true freedom because you're still existing within the framework that is reality itself, even beyond this realm, right? I understand your philosophy of might as well laugh and experience pleasure. Well, that's one really little teeny tiny aspect of my viewpoint. That's nowhere near the full spectrum of my viewpoint. That's like a little teeny smidgen of my viewpoint in specific contexts. But it's definitely a lot more than that. Because I'm talking about pleasure way beyond this realm and this state, not just pleasure here. But personally, I have no plans of staying here. Well, neither do I. But I also don't have any confidence that there is actually an escape from the nightmare hellscape that is the rest of reality, even beyond here. So I don't consider escaping here to be any great achievement whatsoever, because I don't see that as freedom either, even if I escape here. And am a powerful God, able to manifest my own realms. I don't consider any of those things to be an escape, is my point. These bodies are actually the main problem too. Well, the bodies are a problem. I wouldn't necessarily say they're the main problem. They are one of the main problems. Yeah, you could say that. And designed for the purpose of imprisoning us and cutting off our access to real power. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I would agree with that part. I think the main problem is the framework that reality is in and of itself is the main problem. And then the bodies are an extension of that problem. But yeah, for the most part, I agree with that statement. No doubt, in my mind, we will ditch these horrible abominations and regain access to all our being. No doubt. Well, that would be nice, but even then, if you achieve that, guess what? Now you're a being who's responsible even more so to prevent other beings from being tortured to death. And you're more implicated if they're tortured to death than you are now, because now you have more power and more ability to stop it in that state. So if you don't, you're especially implicated as a demonic evil being, that any being at any time can accurately label you evil, because failing to prevent even one entity from being tortured, no matter how powerful you are, is you classified accurately as an evil being. You're evil because you failed to prevent another being from being tortured. So you may be functionally good in the sense of, okay, your intentions are good or this or that, but you're in action evil because your actions did not prevent torture. You see? As much as you may have wanted to. Also, there are many who prevent evil from happening every day. Well, that's true, but they're also engaging in their own type of evil in the process if you hone in on exactly what they're doing during the day. And I can give many examples. And it's good that they should keep doing that. I'm not saying they should stop, but I'm just saying we need to take note of what's actually happening. And just because injustice still exists, well, not just injustice, literal people being tortured to death, children being roasted alive in ovens and microwaves. This is way beyond injustice. This is torture of infants. Still exists. Does not mean it will ultimately continue to indefinitely. Well, the reality that allowed those things to happen once in the first place means that the bloodstain of those things happening is going to remain for the rest of eternity on all reality. Even if going forward somehow, some way, we get to a state where no other being is tortured ever again. Ideally, that's the state I want to get to, where beings are only pleasured forever. Even if we achieve that, the beings who have already been tortured in the billions and trillions and quadrillions, that bloodstain is on our hands forever for the rest of eternity. The stain of the beings we didn't prevent from being tortured is forever on all of us. You, me, every other content creator, every other souled being or unsouled being, NPC, non-NPC. It's on all of us collectively at the same fucking time to various degrees. Okay? Because none of us stopped it. You know? Did you stop Jennifer Daughtry from being tortured to death? If the answer is no, then you're implicated. Did another content creator stop her from being tortured to death? No, they're implicated. Did I? No, I'm implicated. You see the point? The tables are already turning and will continue to, and the pendulum will swing. Well, yeah, I feel that these things will go on, ideally or hopefully, but I don't consider any of these things being actual true freedom or actual technical good or anything like that. They're just what we together, ourselves, you, me, and others close to us, consider to be good for us, and maybe millions or billions of other beings. But who knows what other beings exist outside of our direct experience, or who would consider what we're doing or what we're achieving to be bad to them, harmful to them, and not good. You see what I'm saying? So the good thing is very subjective. No matter how large scale the subjectivity is, it remains a subjective thing. And something by nature being subjective means that it's evil to something else outside of that subjective fold of the entities who process that as subjectively good. Outside of those entities processing it that way, it's processed as evil by other beings. So if there's any ability of something to be processed other than good, then that means it can't be actual good. It can only be felt as good in the experiential sense, but not actual good. Okay? I'm certainly not a demon. Well, I would contend that. And when I say demon, I consider myself a demon and all beings that exist demons. That's my personal stance on it. So if I were to call you a demon, or I were to call myself a demon, which I do consider myself a demon, it's not an insult. If it's coming from me, it's not an insult. I just see it as the reality. Like, we're all demonic, period, whether we believe we are or not. So saying you're not a demon, I mean, I would say that's your own containment bubble. That's basically a containment bubble of obliviousness you're absorbing in to convince yourself that you're good in some objective sense and something other than an evil source to other beings. I could name hundreds of cases where others didn't obviously process me as good or my intentions as good or what I did. So therefore, in action, my actions were still evil, even though my intentions towards someone else were good. Therefore, I'm still classified as a demon accurately, because the action that someone experienced from me, even if they misprocessed what I said, was experienced by them as an evil experience. Therefore, I am still a demon, even if my intention was godly, etc. You see? And I'd say the same classification applies to everyone else. So if you want to not see yourself as a demon, you can absorb in that containment bubble all you want. That's your prerogative. But I'd rather just see myself as a demon and be honest about it, to be honest with you. And can honestly say I engage in no evil I am currently aware of. Now, this is the part that sticks out to me as a great example of a containment bubble of obliviousness. Basically, keyword that you're currently aware of. This is very important. So there's many evils that we're engaging in daily that we're not currently aware of, okay? You, yourself, and myself. But just because I'm not directly aware of every single micro evil I'm engaging in, I'm aware that they're occurring against my will and outside of my intention, okay? But my good intentions, or what I think are good intentions, don't equal me being good or my actions being good. As much as I think they're good or want them to be good, that doesn't mean they are good, you see? Okay? And there's a ton of evil I'm aware of that I'm doing that I wish I wasn't doing, actually, to be fully honest with you. So you engage in no evil you're currently aware of. Do you eat meat ever at all? Do you eat slaughterhouse meat ever at all? That's a form of evil. Do you walk around during the day, crush ants on accident under your feet? That's a form of evil. Do you sit in your house, hanging out, relaxing, meditating, training, while other beings are being tortured throughout the rest of the world while you're just hanging out, relaxing? That's evil. Like, all those things are evil. Yeah, definitely you could say lower tiers of evil, but they're still evil. They're not vile forms of evil. You're not going out of your way to maliciously induce agony on others, but the actions are still evil. So, I mean, they're not good actions. Crushing insects to death isn't good. Eating slaughterhouse animal meat isn't good. You know, it might benefit your body with nutrients, but it's not good what's happening. So that's my point. Or even if you're vegan or vegetarian, the same thing, you know, having to plow up the ground and eat food that's been plowed up, or, you know, however the food was grown or produced, the process of it being plowed up to feed a person isn't good. I mean, you know, any way you cut the coin on it. That does not mean I'm perfect. Well, nobody's suggesting anyone's perfect here, but lack of perfection means by definition everything is evil to some extent. So you're actually confirming the point I keep making. Lack of perfection in goodness equals evil. That's what it means. So this is a point, because everybody recognizes they're not perfect, right? I recognize that everybody does. Every sane human, humble person recognizes this. So perfection actual goodness would equal perfection of that goodness. If there's lack of perfection to it, that means there's evil within mixed in with the goodness. That means therefore reality is evil. Even a slight stain of evil on the rest of reality makes the rest of reality evil by implication. Okay? That's my point. So even if you have like 99.9% of reality, a paradise state for like 99.999% of beings, if you have even one being out of all those 99.99% that's tortured or exposed to torture, never mind if it even actually happens, an entity exposed to the potential of torture, even one, then the rest of the reality, it's a shit stain on the rest of it. The rest of reality is evil by definition because there's the potential of even one of those beings being tortured. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. And the reality we see is vastly different from that. The vast majority of beings, definitely in this realm and likely in others, most of them are being tortured most of the time. Very rarely are entities not being tortured. Okay? Definitely in this realm and highly likely in other realms or most other realms. Okay? Tortured, if not actively being prevented, if not the realm being actively maintained as a paradise state against torture, right? That does not mean I'm perfect, but I'm certainly much different from the rest. Always have been. Well, we all like to think we're super unique, don't we? I would like to think that I'm so much more different from everybody else. But what I've come to realize is, however different we think we are, you can find so many elements of sameness with other people that are really notable there, in every one of us. No matter how much a person says I'm so much different or this or that, I mean, we're really not as different as we really believe or think we are, dudettes, folks. Like, you know, I believe and think that I'm so incredibly unique and set apart from everybody else, and everybody else thinks that too. Most people think that. But when you really analyze any of us, myself, yourself, anybody you interact with, you can see a lot of sameness amongst individuals. None of us are as unique or distinct as we think or would like to believe we are, is my point. However much individuality we may have otherwise, okay? We definitely toot our own horns a lot in this process of thinking we're so incredibly fucking unique from everybody else, when we're really not at the end of the day, okay? Some may see that as self-righteousness, but I really don't care. Well, it's not them see it is self-righteousness, and I don't care. All right, that's fine. That's what it is. I'm self-righteous, you're self-righteous. We're also demonic. So you see my point? Like, in my view and in my stance, you don't have to answer for anything. There's so much less to answer for, because the stance is I'm recognizing that we're already all these things. We're demonic, we're prideful, we're not as unique as we believe we are, we're self-righteous, we're all these things already. I mean, I do care. I am self-righteous, and I do care about that I'm self-righteous, but I think self-righteousness should be a thing everybody should have. You should be self-righteous. I think that's something but you should recognize that that's what it is. You know, you are self-righteous, and that's fine. Be self-righteous. I think the ego is also a sacred thing. You should maintain the ego instead of try to get rid of it. Those who keep choosing freedom and doing what's right will always find their way back to the kingdom of light. In other words, kingdoms of perpetuation of pleasure. Great, cool, awesome. We are eternal, and suffering is always temporary. Well, even if the suffering is temporary, this is actually a significant point often brought up within the Krishna fold. It's like, that's actually aside from a point, and it's irrelevant. The point is, the eternal potential of torture happening to sentiences is forever remaining. And the torture has already happened to tons of sentients, possibly to ourselves in past states, and can happen to us at any time going forward into the future. Okay? Because here we are now. Here these things are happening to us currently. Okay? So it's irrelevant whether they're temporary or not. The point is, they are occurring. Experiences of torture are occurring, right? And that in and of itself is the horror. Whether they're temporary or not is totally irrelevant. The point is they're going on. Okay? You know, nobody would go up to Jennifer Daughtry and be like, you know what? You're only going to be tortured for 3 days, for 36 hours. You're just going to be tortured temporarily for 3 days. And then after this, for the next billion years, you're going to be in a state of light and happiness. Don't worry about it. It's just a soul purging thing, you know, as they go on torturing her, right? Basically, this is more or less, I know this isn't what you're saying and this isn't your perspective towards it. Like you would never say that to someone, but you get my point. This is basically, in essence, what that statement is saying, in essence. It's basically the statement of Jennifer Daughtry's torture only lasted 36 hours, so it's really not as horrible or as bad as it could have been. But it's like, you see what the problem in that way of thinking, there's a lot off with that perspective of thinking. And that's why it's irrelevant whether it's temporary or not. It doesn't matter whether the torture lasted 5 minutes or 30 years. And yes, there were people who have been tortured for 30 years worth of their life. Plus, that has happened. It has gone on. Okay. 20, 25, 30 years plus. All right. These cases do exist. Named people where this has happened to them, which I'll talk about going forward on this channel. But the point being is obviously it's worse if the torture lasts so much longer. But the point is it goes on. Never mind how long it lasts or not. The point is, even moments worth of torture are not acceptable within sentient reality. But they exist because the reality is a hellscape that exposes beings to torture, right? This reality, and I would suggest based on huge amounts of evidence, the majority of realities beyond this one also, not just this one, okay? Now, if the evidence that we're seeing is any indication of what other realms are like, or likely like, well, many of them are more likely far worse than this one even, in fact. And this one's fucking horrible for most beings most of the time. And to all of us, a little bit all the time, right? So there you have it, folks. So there's my playlists. Okay, if you want to check out the different playlists. So Love You Like That, Remember Jennifer, Nightmare Called Reality, Transgender Kindness, Topic Stories from My Past, Historical Horrors, Funny Videos, Sexual Topics, Demonic Cabal, Educational Videos, Rants Against Imposed Pain. So with all these videos together, I think you will see very thoroughly and very clearly all the abundance of evidence that both this tier of reality as well as realities beyond this one are all variations of evil at the very least, if not all out, absolute, horrific, vile forms of experience and torture. Okay? The only good being things that we directly experience as pleasurable and maintain as such, and the things that in fact pleasure others as well as ourselves mutually, consensually, at the same time, in clear and obvious ways that do not take any guesswork. So with that, I look forward to everyone's video responses, and hopefully I've convinced everyone by now that actual good beings do not in fact exist, only beings we feel are good based on our personal experiences with them, and beings that others as well as us feel are good, but no beings that are actual good in any objective sense of the term. And I hope I've convinced everyone to understand why it's important to be aware of this technical distinction. There's many topics where the technical distinction is not such a big deal. The practical brass tacks aspect is more important, but this is one of the rare exceptions where the awareness of the technical reality is in fact actually important for many different reasons. So I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, a day of maximal pleasure, freed from torture, from myself and others to the max, and I will talk to you soon. Have a good one.